To me, authentic leadership is leadership, I would say from the heart, but maybe from the center, that one recognizes the core of one's being and leads from that space. There's a term that I have heard used of abandoning ourselves. That very often we abandon ourselves, and that means that we leave the center of our being and kind of act out of a pretense. And acting out of pretense has a way of not allowing our best selves to step forward.
Do you want to make an impact and be a female leader leading from your own values? If this question triggers a yes, you are at the right place listening to the right podcast. My name is Caroline Glasbergen, and every week I interview a female leader and experts to find out what it means to make an impact while remaining true to yourself. You will hear about barriers that have been overcome and many personal experiences and insights on how to lead authentically. Welcome to the New Female Leaders Podcast, the podcast on authentic female leadership. Hey, dear friends, a very warm welcome back to the brand new episode of New Female Leaders. How are you today? I'm super excited, more than thrilled, to be honest, to share this episode with all of you, because this woman has been on my list for such a long time. Today, we share the episode with Mpho Tutu van Furth with you all, and she is a very well-known South African preacher, author, activist, and the daughter of Desmond Tutu. So, in this interview, I speak with Mpho about the Ubuntu philosophy or concept, and where the Westerners, as she explains, think about Ubuntu as a concept or a philosophy. Actually, according to Mpho, Ubuntu is a fully embodied way of leadership. And the essence of Ubuntu is to meet each human being as another human being with thoughts and ideas and feelings and sensations. So Ubuntu is a way of being in a world that recognizes the full humanity of each of us. Now, like I said, Mpho is the daughter of anti-apartheid activist Archbishop Desmond Tutu and Leah Tutu. And she has written 2 books with her father, Made for Goodness and the Book of Forgiving. And in this interview, we talk a lot about forgiveness, because after much reflection on the process of forgiveness, Mpho has seen that there are basically 4 steps to healing. And we will discuss these 4 steps in this interview. Guys, I'm so excited to share this interview with all of you, because I am such a big fan of Mpho. And, well, that's why the interview is also much longer than you're used to from us, because I basically couldn't stop asking questions. I really hope you love it as much as I do. Don't forget to share a print screen of the episode via your Instagram stories. Tag Mpho and tag New Female Leaders so we can also share your love and insights with our communities. And before we start, and this is for all our Dutch listeners, a quick heads up, because on the 29th of June, we will launch my book, New Female Leader, during an epic digital event in the Edam Tower called House of New Female Leaders, The Sky is the Limit. And you can be part of this event, which is basically a really exciting combination of a festival and a summit. And I would love you all to be there and celebrate this moment together and connect with each other and see the role models and ask questions. And so if you haven't, make sure that you pre-order the book New Female Leader right now at your local bookstore or via bol.com and send your payment slip to newfemaleleaders.org. And you'll receive a free ticket to the New Female Leaders digital event on the 29th of June. All right, if you want to check out the show notes of this interview, please go to newfemaleleaders.org. There you will find all the information and all the links to the books that we discuss. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for a newsletter. All right, without further ado, I wish you an amazing podcast with Mpho. Mpho, a very, very warm welcome to the New Female Leader Show. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. And you?
Yeah, I'm well. Actually, I'm really excited. I mean, I've looked forward so long to this interview, and finally the moment is there. So yeah, I'm really excited, and we just started. Before we pressed record, we took, or you initiated to take a few breaths together and to really arrive. And it's interesting, right? How, like, even taking 2 conscious breaths already makes such a huge difference.
Good.
Yeah. But just to start off, we talk about authentic leadership in this podcast, and I'm so curious, what does that mean to you?
To me, authentic leadership is leadership, I would say from the heart, but maybe from the center, that one recognizes the core of one's being and leads from that space. There's a term that I have heard used of abandoning ourselves. That very often we abandon ourselves, and that means that we leave the center of our being and kind of act out of a pretense. And acting out of pretense has a way of not allowing our best selves to step forward.
And why do you think it's important that, or do you think it's important that we lead more from an authentic place?
Well, it's important for both the person exerting leadership and the people who they lead. When we lead from our authentic center, that allows other people to be fully who they are, to present with all of their gifts and talents, but also with their vulnerabilities and failures. Knowing that one isn't judged for one's vulnerability allows one to take some risks that one wouldn't otherwise feel free to take.
So what I hear you saying as well is that it's it goes both ways, right? So when you allow yourself to lead from your authentic essence, you also give the permission to the other one, to the other person, and vice versa.
Yes, to show up fully as themselves. Yes.
Yeah. And that immediately takes me to the concept, and I hope I pronounce it correctly, of Ubuntu.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can you please tell us a bit more about what that means?
Yeah. So I guess for Westerners, it's a concept and a philosophy. For Africans, it's a way of being. So it's a fully embodied way of being. In the West, we tend to keep a lot up in our heads. A lot of the way that we self-present starts in our heads. We think about, well, what do I want to look like, be like, feel like, today, but we begin in the head. The concept of Ubuntu is one that recognizes us as full human beings. So not a disembodied head, but a head that is in the context of a full body. And so the concept, because I don't have a better way to describe it. The essence of Ubuntu is the essence of humanity. And it is to meet each human being as another human being, another whole human person who has thoughts and ideas, yes, but who also has feelings and sensations, who has needs and wants that are fully embodied. And so it can be a demonstration of Ubuntu to put food on the table of someone who is hungry, or to offer a jacket to someone who is cold. It's not just a way of leadership, but it is a fully embodied and way of leadership, and a way of being in the world that recognizes the full humanity of each of us. And by the same token, also recognizes that in order for me to be fully human, you must be fully human. And so that it's the notion of interdependence is embedded in the whole concept, in the whole being of Ubuntu.
Yeah, so it's really about, and I got this actually from a video from your father also. So it's my humanity bounds up in yours. So it's interconnected, like you're saying. So my existence is because of yours, basically, right? Is that correct? So it's very much about the interpersonal relationship instead of only about you. Is that correct?
Yes, and but yes, and it is very intimately about you.
Yeah, exactly.
But and that's. But I think in Western conceptualization, you have Descartes saying, "I think, therefore I am," and that's kind of okay. Whereas the Ubuntu framing is, "You are, therefore I am."
Exactly. Yeah. So if we dive a bit deeper then into authenticity and Ubuntu, can you help me to understand how that works? Because I hear what you're saying, that it's actually very much embedded, and at the same time, especially I guess here in the West, it feels like, yes, but I am because I am, right? And that's actually, I have to sort of set boundaries around me. So I'm just very interested in how then this authenticity is embedded in the relationship.
Yeah. So to our way of thinking, a solitary human being is a contradiction in terms. That we learn how to be human in the context of our relationships with other human beings. This is, we learn how to walk or talk or think or relate to other human beings by seeing how other human beings walk or talk or think or relate. And we don't place so high a premium on individuality in the sense of I being the highest good. In the Ubuntu frame, we are the highest good. So the greed and the grabbing and the clawing your way to the top, and kind of my individual path to the top doesn't make sense in the Ubuntu frame. In the Ubuntu frame, what I achieve is an achievement that absolutely depends on what other people are doing around me. So, as my dad would say, when one stands out in a crowd, it's because one is being carried on the shoulders of others.
So, and then again, it seems like it's even more important to be authentic because you are within the crowd, or you see what I mean? It's like it's because of the connection with the crowd, with others. To me, it seems like you can only build these connections once you are really connected to your essence. Is that also what you meant by it's embedded in Ubuntu?
Yes, I think the first, maybe the first question or the place to begin is to think about how one conceptualizes leadership.
That's a good question. Because it immediately the whole it's not a concept, but the way of looking at life or living life from a place of Ubuntu. When for instance I talk about new leadership, we talk about, okay, there's not only the P for profit, there's the P for people, for purpose, for planet, but it seems to be all integrated already in what you're saying. So it's a great suggestion that we go to what does leadership mean from this.
So if you conceptualize leadership as power over people, then Ubuntu doesn't actually really have a place in that conceptualization. If you conceptualize leadership as power with people, then it completely changes the way that you operate, even as a leader. What is my task as a leader? My task is to bring all of us forward. My task is to bring me and my team to the assigned goal, whatever it is that we have articulated as our goal and purpose. That is something that I can't arrive at by myself. I need the people around me in order to achieve whatever it is that I'm describing as the purpose of the organization, of the entity, or the family, or the group, or the community, or the business.
Yeah, so it seems to me that there's also a very important part of it is the serving leadership, as they call it in science as well. It's like it's very much also the role of the leader to bring everybody to a place where they can perform and be the best possible version of themselves, I guess, and to achieve a goal together. How do you feel we are doing right now when it comes to leadership?
Yeah, I think that's well, which we wear.
Sure.
At the moment, where I would say as a world community, we're really struggling. We're really struggling to find models of leadership to which we can all subscribe. We're struggling even in places where it would seem that we shouldn't be, where it would seem as though things should be easy. They're not. And part of the notness is, we're speaking now still in COVID time. And COVID has proved not to be the great equalizer, and not to quite be as much of an opportunity for us as a world community to draw together. We had the misfortune of kind of the global north at the beginning of the pandemic, having a lot of finger pointing or denialist leadership, and the global south not being economically positioned to ride out this pandemic in the same way or with the same sets of choices that the global north could make, about, okay, well, we're going to shut everything down and give bailout money right, left, and center. If you don't have bailout money in your budget, you don't have it. And so, kind of the ideas about how it is that we're going to manage our way through the pandemic have been a real challenge, right? All the way through. And then when you look kind of west and east at how differently the pandemic has been managed, in the East, it was a crisis initially, but was handled as a crisis and something extraordinary. And we will do the most right now so that at some point in the near future, we don't have to. And so when you look at infection rates and death rates and say China, Singapore, Vietnam, they were incredibly low. But the moves that those governments made were initially described as draconian, which they were. And you kind of have a counterpoint in, say, New Zealand, which also made some fairly draconian moves at the outset, but have bought for themselves, as a consequence of having been really stringent with their shutdowns and testing and contact tracing and mask wearing and so on and so forth, have bought for themselves a a life that looks a little bit more like a post-pandemic life than anything that we're seeing in Europe or really in the Americas.
And from the perspective of Ubuntu, how are we, or what is your view on what our world leaders, but also perhaps what we as individuals can do to lead ourselves?
Well, I think, again, looking at what the countries did that have managed to weather this storm in a better way, that maybe we should be looking at them and saying, well, what did you do? What that made it possible for you to be standing on this side of a COVID crisis rather than looking at a third or a fourth wave of COVID. And I think, part of that is an arrogance of, we're not prepared to take advice from you. For whatever reasons, we don't like you in terms of trade, we don't like you in terms of race, we don't like you in terms of language, we don't, whatever it is, and making decisions on that basis, rather than saying, actually, we care about our citizens enough to do things that are incredibly uncomfortable, but aren't going to be forever in place. And then the second is, is the vaccine. And again, the vaccine distribution has not been our shining hour either. And, in terms of, the West and global North snatching up enough vaccine futures to vaccinate their population multiple times over, while poorer countries are really scrambling to be able to find, not even getting to the point of affording, but to be able to find vaccine, and then having found it, to be able to afford vaccine. And so we're back in that same circle. I, me, my cycle that is definitely not a model of Ubuntu-based leadership. And I think that if we had approached it from an Ubuntu perspective, we might have got out of this a lot quicker and have emerged from it a lot better, because then we would have said, how do we need to distribute this vaccine to make sure that it's getting to all of the people who need it the most as quickly as possible. And, as they say, crowdsourcing, sometimes multiple heads are better than one.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it's basically what you're saying also is looking at this pandemic from basically a country perspective is again very focused on the individual, whereas obviously we're on one earth and we all have to deal with this. So why not looking at from that togetherness point of view. Another aspect, what I find very interesting, and you wrote a book about it as well together with your father, and it links also a bit to like making mistakes, because we're all making mistakes now. You just pointed out a few. But then we have to move on. And then there is a very, very, very important, and it feels almost, it feels not correct to call it tool, but one of the ways, or maybe the way, is forgiveness of ourselves, but also forgiveness of others. Can you please elaborate on what is forgiveness and why is it so important? And also, 3 questions in one. What is the role of forgiveness in terms of leadership?
So I would say, and in our book, No Future with no, wrong book, Book of Forgiving. No Future was my dad's book, but was the book that led to the Book of Forgiving.
Yes.
And maybe helpfully. In No Future, what my dad described was saying that in order to be able to create a different world, we need to be able to forgive what has happened in the past, and in order to be able to have a hope of moving forward into something better. And as long as we are stuck in the anger or resentment of what happened in the past, we're not able to progress to a better world. And then the question was, okay, well, great. Forgiving sounds like a good idea, but how do you do that? How do you move from where you are to a place of something better or different? And so forgiving is a process, a 4-step process as we describe it, with the first step being to tell the story. So in order to really forgive, you have to really know what it is that you're forgiving. And so to be able to tell the story as much as it needs to be told, as often as it needs to be told. And that's whether you're talking on a personal and interpersonal or a systemic level. An institutional or a systemic level, that the story has to be told. And so I think one of the things is that maybe as an example, the Me Too movement, that for a lot of women who had Me Too stories for years, if not for decades, those Me Too stories had been shoved underground or put on the back burner, or the pretense was that nothing happened there, when actually something happened there. And in order to begin to truly heal from what had happened, the story had to be told. And sometimes that is the biggest barrier to genuine forgiveness, is that we don't want to tell the story because the story is too painful to tell. And it's too painful to tell. It's also too painful to hear. So, I don't want to hear that I have been the bad guy in the story, and so I would rather that let's just move on. Let's pretend that didn't happen and move on. And we're very good at pretending things didn't happen and moving on. But the problem with that pretense is that eventually it comes back to bite you. If it hasn't been, if truth is buried alive, it doesn't stay buried. It keeps trying to claw its way up out of the grave. And so you have a Me Too movement of people whose truths were buried alive, and whose truths have finally said, you know what, I'm done with lying here buried. I need to be told. And so there has been a reckoning around that. Over the past year, there has begun to be more of a reckoning with race. And that too has been, stories that have been buried for decades, centuries, or shoved aside are coming forward to be told and to have their space to be dealt with. And so the first part of any forgiveness process has to be telling the story, because you have to know what it is that you're trying to forgive before you can embark on truly forgiving.
And before we go to the second step, Mpho, what comes to my mind is that a lot of, and also the stories that I hear, is that very often it's very like you said, it's very, but people are really scared to share their story, to use their voice, to tell their truth, because they're afraid of the reactions from the other party, from their surroundings, and sometimes even because they're just afraid of hearing the story themselves coming out of their mouth. Do you have any like concrete suggestions, I would say, to how to speak your truth? Like how can you tell the story in a way that it is healing?
So telling your story in a way that it is healing is different for each person. What each person needs isn't, it's not necessarily the same thing, and it changes from context to context, and it changes on the basis of, is it an individual issue, or is it an institutional matter, or a global, or whatever. And so sometimes in the book we describe some practices that people can engage as individuals. So journaling being one of them.
Yes.
Finding somebody who is both trustworthy and non-judgmental, and that can be a friend, or it can be a clergy person, or it can be a therapist who is willing to hear your story, hear you out, and isn't going to judge you for whatever the story is. It's your truth, and that can be a place of beginning. That the first time I say it out loud, I want it to be to somebody who isn't going to try and fix anything for me, but is just going to hear me tell my story.
Okay, and the second step?
So telling your story is the first step, and then naming the hurt is the second step, and that is, to say, when you did X, Y, Z, it did this to me. This is how I felt. I was hurt. I was ashamed. I was demeaned or belittled. I was terrified. And to be able to name what that hurt is that is the kind of the precise pinpoint of what it is that is to be forgiven, is the hurts that you have, that you've experienced or that you've inflicted on someone else, and the just that piece of work of unpacking the hurt, of unpacking the name of that hurt, can also be an incredibly healing thing. It's when we're hurt, our habit is to try and run away from that pain point. Whatever that pain point is, we want out. We want no part of it. So like if you've fallen and banged your knee or scraped your knee open, then you don't want to touch it, even though you know that, okay, well, I need to clean this wound so that I can bind it up and hope for it to heal properly. But every time you come close to where the wound is, it's like, hey, nah, I don't want to touch it. And that too is like that process in the forgiving process of saying, here's where it hurts. This is exactly what the hurt is. I can look at it. I can touch it. I know it's painful. I know it's tender, but this is what it is, and that I need to be able to cleanse it in order for it to be able to heal properly.
So, from what I hear from you now on the second step, naming your hurt, it's not only important to be able to also convey to the other person, okay, so this is exactly where or what hurt it at that moment that you said this or did that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's also, it seems like it's kind of uncovering for yourself, like what was the exact thing?
Mm-hmm.
Because at least when I talk about my own experience, we often, and I also recognize it myself, that we think the problem is A and we're hurt because of A, but actually we have a specific fear or need or thing that lays below that is actually the reason for the hurt. And it feels like it's really it feels like a process of also like really examining for yourself in a very conscious way, like what is really going on here. Is that correct? Is that also how you see it?
Yeah. I think about, kind of in our most intimate relationships, where, so Sweetie and I have an argument. My Sweetie and I never argue.
But let's say that happens.
So Sweetie and I have an argument.
Right.
I say something really cutting to Sweetie.
Right.
And then, kind of, and I storm off, and then I'm like, oh yeah, that wasn't, I really screwed up. And so I go back to Sweetie and I say, oh, Sweetie, I'm so sorry. Shouldn't have said that. And Sweetie is not yet done. So Sweetie is not yet ready to forgive me, because Sweetie wants me to know where that cut landed.
Yeah.
So it's not just that I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, Sweetie, and, hug, kiss, kiss, and everything is all over.
Right.
Because it's not. And I think that very often in our intimate partner relationships, like when we know that, oh yeah, I really screwed up this time, I really screwed up this time, never happens.
Yes, but imagine.
Yes, but imagine, I really screwed up this time, and I want to go and give an apology, and Sweetie wants to accept my apology, but isn't done. It's like there's, we've finished, but it's not done, but I feel churlish for saying that it's not done, because you came and you gave me such a nice apology, and I know that it's not easy to apologize. But sometimes it's, the kindest thing that we can do for each other is actually allow each other the space to be able to say, when you did that, it felt like this. This is how the hurt landed, or this is where the hurt landed in me. And, don't come and tell me what I felt like. Let me tell you what I felt like. Even if you're right about what I felt like, better to let me say, this is how I felt. And, this is what I want you to get, or this is what I want you not to do the next time.
Yeah. It goes beyond the situation, actually, because you never know and you can never imagine really where that cut exactly landed. And it's both a reflective process for yourself, as well as acknowledging towards the other that, and giving the space to tell, okay, that you thought it was my shoulder, but it was actually my knee. Yeah. All right. And then there's the third step.
And then the third step is to actually be able to offer forgiveness. And offering forgiveness is really saying, I no longer reserve the right to extract revenge for what you did. And I no longer describe you. I know that that horrible thing that you did, or that mean thing, or that whatever, is not the full description of who you are. You're a person who in the past could do such a thing, but now I'm opening a road to a future for us in which you're not a person who could do such a thing.
Yes. So you basically separate the action from the person, right?
Yes.
And then the fourth?
And then the fourth is that you have the option of reconciliation or release. Release is, sometimes the person who hurt you is no longer around for whatever reason. They've moved across the country, they've left town, they are deceased, whatever the reason, they're no longer there. But that allows you to, okay, I'm actually done with that. I've forgiven them and I can move on, and I have reclaimed that emotional space in my life that was taken up by my anger or resentment or anguish or whatever. Or reconciliation, which says, I want to be in relationship with you, but it has to be a different relationship, a relationship in which you could not inflict the kind of hurt that you inflicted on me, that, that now needed to be forgiven.
Right. Yeah, and that's a very interesting step, because I think many people confuse reconciliation with forgiveness.
Yeah. It's part of the process. But it's, I guess, maybe if you're not a Christian, it's an optional extra. If you if you are a Christian, then it's part of the, it's part of your life's work.
Yes. And I think what's also important here, Mpho, is that this whole process, you can do it as an individual. It's you don't have to make this interpersonal, right? I mean, you can also decide that this is like you go through those steps, you choose to like journal or talk to a friend. You make sure you really understand, okay, this is where the hurt landed, and you offer forgiveness. And this is a process that you can do completely on your own, right?
It is a process you can do completely on your own.
Yeah. And then when we link this to leadership, what is forgiveness an important trait for a leader? And if so, how can you give maybe examples of?
Well, I think it's probably an essential trait for a leader. You're as a person who's entrusted with any degree of leadership, you're going to have people in your circle who screw up. You're going to have people in your circle who screw up. And that may be, that may be subordinates who are, doing the wrong thing. It may be people who have a commitment to deliver some process or package or whatever, and they don't do it in the subscribed time or in the assigned time, or any one of those number of things.
Right.
And you have the opportunity there to forgive. And forgiveness doesn't mean you didn't do it, or I'm not pissed about it, or there aren't consequences. It doesn't let anyone off the hook. But it does say, okay, here is the process. This is what happened. This is how it has affected me, the team, the company, whatever. And this is how we're going to act going forward. And that it's a growth opportunity and a learning opportunity for all of us. But it's absolutely necessary, because if you're the unforgiving boss, it's like, okay, well, you screwed up and you're gone. And what does that do to a team? That I'm not going to take any risks, because if I take a risk and I fail, then I'm gone. I want the job, so I'm going to stay, but I am going to stay in my corner doing only exactly those things that have been assigned me, and don't look for me to put up my hand for anything.
Yeah, so it sounds like, and I know this also from our own team, that forgiveness is, and also like making the part of the culture is so important in order to have innovation, to really to grow together. And I guess also what you said in the beginning, that there is a culture of where people dare to try something and to experiment, and that they can really also find their authentic talent and strength within the organization. If not, but I guess, yeah. Sorry.
And as a leader, to be able to forgive yourself. Because
yes.
I mean, as much as subordinates or team members are likely to screw up, you're likely to screw up too.
Yes. We're all human, right? That's the whole thing. That's the whole thing. So what I was wondering, when we look at authenticity and forgiveness, what a lot of women that listen also to this podcast, they indicated, okay, I struggle with being myself in the work environment, in the organization where I work. But that's also because of systemic issues around, for instance, stereotyping, about how you should behave as a woman, what should be, or what is exactly a good leader. We're dealing with these stereotypes, and very often women indicate, okay, that is where I struggle. So I was wondering if you can maybe talk a bit about these systemic issues that we start to see now. They come to the surface more and more, but we're still dealing with them. We're in this transition. How can forgiveness help us in this transition?
I think maybe the biggest help in this transition, and you're absolutely right. We are in a transition. We're not what we were. We're not what we're becoming. So we're somewhere in that liminal, that kind of threshold space where we have, one foot in the past and one foot raised off the floor. So we're kind of balancing on one foot, not quite sure what we're going to land in when we land. And one of the things that we are learning now is more and more in the kind of Ubuntu frame is the need for community, the need for allyship, the need for taking up for each other, taking up for each other's causes, and the more inclusive our workplace communities are, the more that we express our the Ubuntu frame of leadership, the more beneficial it is, not just for women in positions of leadership, but for men also, because the patriarchal model has its downfalls for men as well. Men get stereotyped as well, get pigeonholed as well, are expected to act in ways that maybe aren't aligned with the essence of their being. So I don't think that the current models are models that really work for any of us. So the first is to identify allies and to really speak up for each other. And then the second is taking that first step of the work of forgiveness, is telling the story, is being prepared to own up to the ouchness of current models, actually, no, it doesn't work for me to wear a mini skirt and a pair of high heels because that's what the culture is in this workplace. Actually, my authentic self wants to wear bell bottoms and sneakers, or I don't know. Or one hopes that one has slightly more fashion sense, but hey, whatever. But just the whatever it is that is the pigeonhole, to be able to say, yeah, this pigeonhole doesn't work for me, and it affects my work negatively because I'm so concerned about my appearance, and it takes so much time to do that piece of work, that the piece of work that really needs to happen isn't happening.
And talking about speaking up for each other, like what we see, and you already referred to it, we are more and more speaking up and stand up for our rights, which I think is, well, that's obviously a very, very good development. But at the same time, I also see that polarization occurs a lot. And maybe that is the first phase or something, but I'm curious, like, what is your view on this? And do you see in any way that we can, within this transition, we can find each other instead of polarizing?
That's also an issue of goal and purpose. So when I'm speaking up, what is my purpose in speaking up? For whom am I speaking up? Who benefits from what I say, and who's benefiting from the status quo? So as much as storytelling is important, story listening is also incredibly important. So that, that too becomes a part of the journey.
Yeah, so you're talking about the intention behind it, I think, right? So what is the reason why you're speaking up, and what is your
Agenda.
purpose? What's your agenda? And I guess also about holding space for the story of the other one, using compassion, or what because listening is a I guess it's a very important trait also for a leader. But in this particular example, what type of listening are you referring to?
I think that there's an active type of listening that begins with asking, okay, well, whose stories are getting surfaced, whose stories are being heard, and whose stories dominate, and whose stories are absent from our consideration as we think about how it is that we shape ourselves to move forward, as we consider what kind of a team do we want to be, and how do we move forward as that team that we want to be.
Right, and I guess that also relates very much to privilege, and that I think 2 days ago someone else gave a wonderful example that, for instance, as a Dutch citizen, we're so like when we want to travel, of course now it's difficult, but in general it's so easy, right? We just book a ticket and we're flying basically to every country in the world. And then she said, like, I only realized that I had this privilege when I was in when I looked at my team, and it was a very like international team, and there were people all from all over the world, and lots of people they needed visa, and it was very complicated to make that trip,
and very expensive.
And she was like, wow, for me, having this passport and being able just to to go to this airline website and to book a ticket is a very normal thing to do. I never realized how privileged I am. So I guess also that what you're talking about is that with the active listening, it also helps us to understand where we come from ourselves, and the related privileges that we have because of that.
Well, I mean, that's that is part of privilege, is that
right.
I don't have to know anybody else's experience.
Exactly.
And so, that when I recognize someone else's experience, and I'm able to take in someone else's experience, that is the beginning of relinquishing some of that privilege, and can be the beginning of creating an environment of power with, as opposed to power over, others in my community or my team.
Yeah, you're right. It's only a start, but it's a big start. A big start.
Yeah. No, it is a big start. I mean, that kind of is almost the definition of privilege, is that I don't have to know anything about you. When you think about, for instance, the person who cleans your house, kind of, knows what kind of cleaning products you like, knows how you like the house cleaned, knows what sheets you're going to be sleeping on tonight, knows, all of your bathroom products, etc., etc. What do you know about that person? Do you even know where they live? Just that kind of level of, and that is the privilege. The privilege is, I absolutely, there's almost nothing about you that I have to know. And yet you know so much about me.
Thank you for this very clear example. Yeah. So, Mpho, I mean, I can talk to you forever, but obviously, spirituality and your faith is super important to you. It's your, I think it's your life. I'm very curious. How do you feel, or what is the importance to you of your faith and your spiritual life in leadership?
Yeah, that's it's kind of like asking a fish, what is the importance to you of water?
Of water. Yeah, no. Okay, yeah. No, you're right. Okay, maybe no, maybe rephrase. Okay, so for many leaders that I've spoken to, they acknowledge the importance of a spiritual practice, of their faith, of specific routines that help them to stay connected to themselves. To me, yeah, it's like you are the fish in the water because you're embodied it. It's as a priest, former priest, you're embodying it. And I'm just wondering if you can show us a bit more about the water. Can you tell us a bit more about how do you feel that if someone is listening and they never consider to bring these type of values into their leadership, what can it bring them and how?
So there's values and their practices.
Okay.
And the two aren't necessarily the same thing. And the practices often support the values, or reaffirm the values, or help draw our attention back to the values. So for instance, we're recording this at the beginning of the month of Ramadan. So our Muslim brothers and sisters are in their fasting period now. And that is a practice. It is a practice of daily fasting that calls their attention back to themselves and back to God, and back to the tenets of their religious faith. In the Christian calendar, we're in the season of Easter. And the season right before Easter was the Christian fasting period of Lent, which is a time when you take on, you take on additional disciplines of prayer, of fasting, of attention, of pulling your attention to God's presence in everything, to pulling your attention to how you're showing up in the world. And that's kind of part of the annual rhythm of a Christian life, but that underpins that underpins and is underpinned by the Christian value of love. So what does fasting have to say about love? Fasting says about love that I'm not eating now, and so now I have time to pay more attention to people in my community, or I have time to pay more attention to my prayer life, or I have time to pay more attention to what part of me, what's in me is really hungry. It's not actually that I need to have a sandwich right now. It's actually that the sandwich is there and it's available and I will go and have it because it's there. But what I really need right now is a cuddle and a conversation. And that maybe because I have taken up the discipline of I'm not going to eat right now, maybe then I will avail myself of the cuddle and the conversation and the real human contact that allows. And so it's like, what are the ways that love, that God, that what is essential gets displaced in me by the things that I allow to fill up my time or to take up space in my life. And leadership, to circle it, kind of all the way back to a concept of leadership as a leader. What are the things that are distractions, that are just taking up a lot of unnecessary space in my mind and in my life, that is time and space and energy that I could be placing in the people around me?
That was a very clear answer for for water and fish. Thank you. But what do you want to pass on to the current and new generation of female leaders to finish up?
If it's the next generation of female leadership, you're powerful, you're awesome, you're beautiful. There's so many strides that my generation of leadership hasn't quite made yet, and that I see you've taken the baton and you're running already. Happy to run with you for as much of this marathon as there is left in me. But I am so proud to see so much of what younger women are doing and what younger women aren't prepared to put up with, and the opportunities that younger women are opening for themselves and for those who come after them.
Thank you so much, Mpho. Thank you for this amazing interview. And thank you for listening. And if you've also enjoyed this interview and you feel that someone else should hear this too and will benefit from these insights, please share it on your Instagram stories and tag us so we can also share your love and your insights with the rest of the community. Mpho, thank you so much, and really hope to speak soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Blessings. Bye-bye.
Would you like to once again be inspired by a new female leader? Subscribe now and share your review so that even more women like you are able to find our podcast. Any ideas, opinions, or experiences in this field? Send an email to info@newfemaleleaders.org. We love to hear from you. Thank you for listening.